Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Spotlight On, a series of interviews brought to you by Overdeck Family Foundation. Here, we sit down with the nonprofit leaders shaping the future of education and talk to them about innovation, evidence, and growth. My name is Emma Banay, and I manage the Foundation's Inspired Minds grant-making portfolio, which aims to build the next generation of confident, creative problem solvers by expanding access to engaging and challenging STEM learning experiences. I'll be your host for today's Spotlight on Growth, and joining me is Dr. Christine Cunningham, Senior Vice President of STEM Learning at the Museum of Science in Boston, Massachusetts. Christine is the founding director of the museum's signature programs, Youth Engineering Solutions and Engineering is Elementary, which develop research-based, field-tested STEM curricula and professional learning resources for students across pre-K through 8th grade and their educators. Previously, Christine served as a professor of practice in education and engineering at Pennsylvania State University, and she's received numerous awards throughout her career, including the American Society of Engineering Education, K-12, and Pre-College Division Lifetime Achievement Award. It's great to see you, Christine.
Wonderful to join you today, Emma.
Great, thanks for being here. So let's talk about STEM, which for anyone who may not know stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. You spent your career dedicated to understanding, enhancing, and expanding high-quality STEM education. In your opinion, why is this engaging hands-on STEM learning so important right now, both in and outside of the classroom?
Yeah, engaging hands-on STEM learning helps students to understand the world around them. And this might include both the natural world as well as the human-made or engineered world. STEM learning helps prepare youth to shape that world that they live in. And our world is changing just so quickly, we can't predict what careers will exist when today's, say, second graders graduate. Yeah. So to really thrive in that future, students need to develop problem-solving skills, creativity, and critical thinking, among many other things. And hands-on learning is, I think, the best way for them to understand what they're learning by applying it in real-life situations. So it's not just about the what, but also the how behind science, technology, engineering, and math. So, for example, when students, let's say, dive into an engineering design challenge or conduct a scientific experiment, they're really learning to troubleshoot, to collaborate with each other, to iterate through multiple cycles of design. And these are skills that will help them in any career, both whether you're inside the classroom or outside the classroom. This type of learning can spark kids' curiosity, it can build teamwork, and it can really help them develop resilience. So it's not surprising that research will show us that people, but especially kids, learn best when they're engaged in this active, hands-on, relevant experience. And that these kinds of activities can help deepen the students' understanding and their motivation and really create lasting impact. But I would say, like, equally important, when students engage in STEM in this way, they begin to see themselves as STEM capable. So they develop a positive STEM identity, they gain confidence in their own abilities, and that kind of approach and attitude makes them much more likely to go explore and celebrate science and engineering in their everyday lives. But it also opens their eyes to career possibilities, and ultimately that group of experiences helps students recognize that they have the ability to shape their future world. And so that's pretty empowering.
Yeah, I love that. And we will sort of come back to that idea a little bit later in our conversation. So hold on to that. I wanted to talk a little bit about where your work happens. So you currently oversee STEM learning at the Museum of Science in Boston. Can you provide a bit of background on the museum and its mission and how your educational programming addresses some of the challenges and realities that you just mentioned?
Mm-hmm. Our museum's mission is to inspire a lifelong love of science in everyone. And we do this by making science accessible, engaging, and fun for people of all ages, all backgrounds, and all abilities. We do this through a number of media, including the exhibits that we offer, our programs, our curriculum, and our professional learning opportunities. Our vision is a world in which science belongs to each of us for the good of all of us. And rolling back a bit, we were founded in 1830 as the as the Boston Society of Natural History. So we're coming up on our 200th anniversary. We're very excited about that. Very excited about that. Since then, we've grown into one of the world's largest and most beloved science centers. So today, we serve millions of people through a variety of different kinds of platforms, including exhibits, online STEM programs, and in and out of school curricula, both in the United States, but also increasingly abroad. My particular work specifically focuses on that last piece I mentioned, the in and out of school spaces. So I focus much of my work on engineering and computer science. As you mentioned previously, I founded both Youth Engineering Solutions, or YES as we call it, and previously Engineering is Elementary, or EiE, to develop high quality classroom tested curricula for kids in preschool through grade 8. I just spoke a little bit about the reasons for engaging hands-on learning, and really my team is aiming to catalyze and support the kinds of educational environments that do this kind of. So our real central goal of our team is to help children, and we really think about all children, engage in authentic engineering and computer science experiences that make their learning hands-on and relevant. I was just going to mention that engineering is a relatively new discipline for many schools and after schools and summer camps. And so that does present some unique challenges. So we really need to work closely with educators to understand their specific constraints and their specific opportunities to make sure that what we develop are both developmentally appropriate for those kids, but also educationally impactful. So, for example, a 3-year-old and a 13-year-old, which we will both work with on our curricular programs, have very different learning capabilities. And so we need to think carefully about how we tailor our curricula, but then we also work across a variety of different kinds of learning environments, from classroom environments to out of school. So we need to think about how do we create materials that are really appropriate for each of those settings. And throughout all of this, we have to work closely with the educators and, of course, the children themselves to iteratively test and then refine and then improve the resources. But that process then gives us educational experiences that are engaging, that continually respond to these changing needs of teachers and districts, and things continue to evolve over time, and really support educators in fostering that kind of open-ended learning that impacts students no matter where they are.
Let's dive in a little bit deeper there, because this is something we think a lot about in this portfolio, how to support really high quality learning in the in-school setting and in out of school. And you have such experience working in both settings. So this was a big year for the museum and for your team. As we highlighted in the Foundation's 2024 Grantmaking and Impact Report, over 1 million students accessed YES and EiE engineering and computer science units over the last year, which is a huge 115% year over year increase. And that's in both of those settings, in and out of school. So I want to know a little bit more about how you got there. And maybe we can start with your work inside of the classroom. What do you think were some of the driving factors that enabled your team to expand that in-school reach?
Yeah, I'd say there's a few factors that drove our successes. One of the most significant decisions that we made early in 2024 was to make all of our curricular resources available for free download on our website, yes.mos.org. And that mission-driven move really aligns with our commitment that we talked about earlier to make science and engineering accessible to everyone anywhere in the world at any time. Educators are a primary group that tend to download those materials, but we also see individuals from all kinds of fields and backgrounds downloading the materials and looking through them for their own kinds of inspiration. So I find it really gratifying and exciting to see the materials and the resources helping to shape this broader educational landscape. So that I'd say would be the first thing that we did. I'd say in addition to making the resources widely available, we've really focused on building strong collaborations and partnerships in a variety of different ways. Some of them are with school districts or networks that support education and engineering education. So here in Massachusetts, we've partnered with some districts like Chelsea, Boston, Worcester. We've worked closely with the administrators to figure out how engineering education can be best implemented in their setting. And then we provide professional learning opportunities and materials to support that work. We're fortunate that several philanthropic grants, including the Overdeck one, have helped us to support and underwrite some of these efforts, particularly in these times. That has definitely helped us to expand the growth. On the national level, we've collaborated with districts as well as states to introduce engineering. And we've also worked closely with universities like the University of Arkansas, Penn State, Baylor University. So they have faculty and other outreach professionals thinking about pre-K through 12 engineering education, but they're also conducting research, which is really helpful to us. And then I'd say finally, with all of our partnerships, what we're trying to do is implement sort of a train the trainer model where strong advocates for engineering education can learn more about how to use the materials that we have developed so they feel equipped and confident in their abilities to share with educators in their community. So that has really helped us to expand our impact and reach even further because we have a whole group of people that is standing with us to do this work.
Yeah. So you've clearly leveraged a cohort of stakeholders to help you make the inroads that you have in this sort of formal or in-school space. But as you know and speak about, the out-of-school time space is really different, much more fragmented. So how has your team continued to innovate and engage kids and families in STEM learning in the out-of-school time space? And what impact has that had on the museum's growth?
Yeah. So the Overdeck support that we received helped us to develop a product that we call STEM Families, which focuses on how parents and caregivers can engage children in engineering thinking and hands-on activities. Yeah. And we've made that resource available for free download again, and that's available in both Spanish and English. So that's one space that we've been in based on feedback from both school and out-of-school partners. We've just started to develop a new product that we're calling, we think this is the final title, but it might change, YES STEM Event Activities. And the idea behind this is it will support small groups of people, which could be families, as they engage in STEM events at things like STEM nights at schools or STEM nights in the community. And we feel that that will make it easier for communities to engage with STEM in a fun and meaningful way and have some resources to support that kind of work. At a sort of larger level, similarly to the in-school work, in the out-of-school space, we've really looked for powerful partners and national organizations. So for instance, we partner with STEM Next and its Million Girls Moonshot initiative, which is working with after-school networks in all 50 states. And that kind of partnership has really helped us to expand our reach by spreading the word out to after-school programs and their providers about the fact that we offer these resources and they're free. But we also then work with them on getting word into their newsletters or collaborating on webinars or working with them in conferences. So it's by sort of doing this kind of partnership and listening to the needs of the fields and collaborating with those already engaged in this work, we can provide high quality materials to their communities, but it also allows us the back and forth to stay really relevant and continue to innovate. So I think that's helped us to have evolving and broader impact on STEM learning, in spaces beyond the classroom.
Yeah. One of the things I keep hearing in your responses is this sort of toggling back and forth between your national footprint, the work you're doing across the country, and this really local footprint in your own backyard in Boston. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that physical space. So can you tell me more about sort of how you view the museum's role within the Boston community and how that local connection has evolved, I imagine, since the pandemic probably changed how you engage in community pretty significantly?
Yeah. Yeah, our museum has long been one of Boston's most treasured institutions. So almost every person you meet in the area has a story about usually their childhood and the museum. But we've
Boston
also,
resident, yeah,
yes, yeah,
Massachusetts kid.
everyone. It's a
Yep.
great and wonderful space, and I highly encourage everybody to come and visit. But it's not only for kids, so we've been thinking a lot about how to expand our programming to engage adults. So our role really in this community is to help everybody, no matter what their background or what their age is, experience this, wonder of science and engineering. But we really want to make sure that local communities feel that science and the Museum of Science belong to each of them, and it's a place where they can come to explore, to learn, to have fun, to hang out with their family members. There are a lot of different initiatives that we have underway to do this, and I'll just mention maybe two of those today. A little over a year ago, Mayor Wu created Boston Family Days. And this initiative offers free access to Boston's cultural institutions twice a month for all Boston school-age children and their families. And we're very proud that we are one of these cultural institutions.
Yeah.
It really aligns with our belief that every child deserves the opportunity to engage and ignite their curiosity through science and engineering experiences like the ones we have. So that's, one example of us working with the community, working with the larger political people to make sure that kids have this experience. A second exciting project that's currently underway is our museum's Public Science Common initiative. And we are working right now on creating a world-class, both physical and digital space, because we sit in one of the premier science hubs in the entire world, that is Boston. And so our goal for the Public Science Common is that it will serve as a common ground for everybody interested in science and technology. It will be a place where people can come together to share their ideas, to ask questions, to collaborate. And we want this to happen across industry, across academia, across government, across the public. So we're thick in the midst of planning both the new exciting physical space, which we're building right now, and the program, which we have some of, but are actively building new programs, and really trying to work closely with local communities and local organizations to make sure that this will be a resource that serves everybody. So I would say that since the pandemic, our connection with our Boston community has really deepened, and we've become more intentional about making science accessible to all. And the initiatives like the two I just mentioned are, I think, sort of demonstrate our ongoing commitment to the people of Boston and really the whole surrounding region, as well as now increasingly, the nation and hopefully the whole world.
Yeah, that's really exciting to hear. I want to come back to a thread that you actually started on about this idea of like kids experiencing this feeling of being STEM capable. And one of the things that we think about a lot in my portfolio is the importance of these initial experiences that spark STEM interest for kids, and then the ways that that can maintain and grow over time into more durable STEM interest, skill, ability, and so on. I'm wondering if there are examples you can share of a time that you saw that sort of STEM light bulb go off for a child, either at the museum or through YES or EiE. Like, what did that look like? Give us a snapshot.
Yeah, there's so many, and this is one of my favorite parts of the job, I have to say. I'll focus maybe on one of my favorite stories, and it comes from a teacher who shared an experience that came out of a bilingual Spanish-English class that she was teaching on. That class was doing one of our environmental engineering units, and they were designing water filters to remove particles and color from dirty water.
Okay.
We had to make sure it was safe and kids could drink it if they needed to.
Yeah.
One of the students in her class, who was a tall, sort of quiet girl of African descent, was from the Dominican Republic. And she had really, to this point, struggled a lot with her confidence and hadn't really engaged a lot in the academic experiences of the classroom. However, when the class began working on this challenge around water filtration, she really connected deeply with the topic and mentioned that water quality was a significant problem in her home country. So she had had some personal experience. While the class worked through the design challenge, she, began to really shine and worked well with her classmates. She was really trying to solve the problem, so much so that at the end of the unit, she asked the teacher if she could take home a copy of her group's designs. And the teacher really didn't think anything of the time. Like, she said, okay, take them, go off. But months later, the students returned to the class and said, Signora Loisa, I did it. I made a filter that made the water perfectly clear.
Oh, wow.
So it turns out that she had gone home and continued to use, because we have very low cost, readily available materials, use those materials to continue to improve on her design, which is, it's not an easy design to do. The teacher was so impressed by this persistence and ingenuity that she let her share her final design with the whole class.
Oh, great.
But even more inspiring, it gets better, the student told her teacher that her mother had arranged for her to visit a water treatment plant in the Dominican Republic over the summer when they were returning, so she could meet with someone who was working on the desalinization of ocean water for drinking water. So I think that's a great example of how, a unit can spark really a deep connection and help connect to her, someone connect more deeply, but also as part of this experience, as a result of this experience, the student was then recommended for the Gifted and Talented program. So I think sometimes it's just a matter of getting that right spark to really unlock some of the potential that I believe is present in so many of our kids.
Absolutely. And this incredible way that in and out of school work together, right? This initial experience in the classroom that got carried on at home, that then is followed up on this sort of real world visit, just a really lovely example there. So the anecdotes, I can tell, light you up. They light me up too. They're so fun to hear. And something that we've loved about working with you and your team is this commitment to really understanding what works through also really rigorous measurement and evaluation work. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you measure the impact of your programming on students, on educators, and families? And are there any key pieces of evidence that you want to lift up and share with our audience, either from your past work or looking forward to inform your future work?
Yeah, we're really keen on measuring the impact of our program, and in part because we're always thinking about how we're going to do something better or how we're going to evolve as things evolve. So we need to get lots of different kinds of data from the various populations that we work with. So as I mentioned, we work a lot with educators across the country. We really listen closely to them about the impact of engineering on their students and what they're seeing. And of course, any singular story like the one I just shared can be considered an anecdote. But when you hear similar feedback repeatedly, those start to become stronger pieces of data to then examine in more depth. So for instance, teachers were the ones that first drew our attention to the benefits of engineering materials for English learners, which is a group that's rapidly growing in U.S. schools. And these students, unfortunately, often lack some of the access to science and engineering instruction. But the teachers started to tell us again and again that they had higher engagement and more active participation by their English learner students during engineering lessons. And that really got us starting to say, okay, there's something here we should look into. So we started by conducting interviews and surveying over 100 teachers to get a better sense of the impact of that population of students, engineering on that population of students. So one finding, for instance, that surfaced was that engineering projects often involve physical materials that students are manipulating, which can allow English learners to experience success in ways that don't rely on English fluency. They could sort of show what they knew before they had all of the words to describe it. So that was a great example of, working with teachers. We've also partnered with external researchers to study some of the broader impacts of engineering on students and educators. So, for example, some of those studies have focused on how students and educators react to failure, which is a really common part of engineering.
Yep.
Others have thought about how incorporating engineering activities might diversify the pool of students that's recommended for gifted and talented services, like the anecdote I mentioned earlier. At the other end of the academic spectrum, we're working with some researchers who are investigating the impact of engineering on students who are students with extreme special needs to better understand how we can support those teachers. So us partnering with external folks are good. I'd say in terms of the research that we've collected, one of the most significant efforts was a random control study we conducted. It took us about 4 years. It involved 14,000 students in 600 classrooms. And we compared students that were using our materials to a comparison group that were using similar engineering activities, but that lacked many of the core features of our materials. Yeah. So for instance, they didn't have a narrative context, or the really specific connection between science and engineering wasn't available. And the results from that were really clear. They showed that students using our materials, regardless of their demographics, showed better outcomes in both engineering and science than those in the control group. So we really try to look to all of the qualitative and quantitative studies to inform our evolution. During our transition from EiE to YES, which is sort of the next version, we really drew heavily on the research that we had done, but also that others had done to shape our vision of what needed to happen. And we really feel that this continuous feedback loop driven by the data ensures that we are always improving to meet the needs of the students, the educators, and the families that we serve.
You have such a strong foundation on the evidence that you've gathered already, the sort of partners that you've leveraged to get there. I wonder, sort of forward-looking, what are the research questions you're hoping to understand more deeply in the next couple of years, big or small?
Oh, there are so many.
The full list.
The whole list. Let's see. I'll just mention a few of them that stand out. So one of them probes our approach to what we call socially engaged engineering. So we have designed and redesigned our materials to help encourage students to make connections between engineering and their own lives, that socially engaged piece. So the goal is really to get them to think about both the problems and the solutions more deeply, and explore the parameters and the consequences of the designs they have. And we've heard from educators that students respond positively to that approach. I mean, it makes sense, but I'd really like to dive more deeply into how this works best for different kinds of populations, how we can refine the approach and its effectiveness across like different kinds of classrooms. So that, I'd say, is one question. Another question would revolve around how we can better support teachers in engaging students with engineering practices. So again, our approach focuses on helping students understand these behaviors or the practices that engineers use to create products or to create knowledge or to solve problems. So for instance, engineers need to balance criteria and constraints in their designs. But for students to engage in these practices, the teachers need to be both knowledgeable and comfortable with these engineering concepts. And so we're interested in understanding which resources and what kinds of strategies are most effective for deepening their understanding of engineering and its practices, and again, how we can support them. And then I'd say the last one, if I get three, is that, again, there are probably 30 out there, but we have continually tried to think about how to integrate engineering with computer science. So now we have modules that invite students to use computational thinking and computational tools to better understand engineering problems while they're also learning how, key concepts. So they're applying the concepts and using them. But we need more data to fully understand, what the students are learning through these modules and how this compares to other kinds of approaches for teaching computer science. It's a field that's changing really fast with all the new developments in AI, like what do kids need to know? How do they need to know it? So getting some more information about the student outcomes and how we can refine those for even greater effectiveness would be helpful. So some of these questions we'll do the research ourselves, but I really like the model also of partnering with other researchers across the country because it allows us to sort of harness a much bigger force to help us build the understanding. And then we take all that knowledge and put it back into the resources that we develop.
Yeah. Well, we're so excited to learn alongside you. These are questions that resonate, of course, for your work, but the field at large as well. So we're here at our last question. And before I let you go, this is a question that we pose to all of our guests on this interview series. So looking ahead to the next decade in education, what is something that makes you hopeful?
Yeah, so I'd say looking ahead, there's a lot to be hopeful about, and a lot of it I think is in shifts in how we're thinking about and approaching learning. So one area that has made tremendous progress in my work, at least, is the inclusion of engineering in educational spaces. 20 years ago, when I began thinking about how we might introduce engineering to young children, this was a really radical idea.
Yeah.
But today, engineering has found a place in after-school programs and classrooms and STEM enrichment activities and museums. That's not to say there's not work to be done, but we're moving in the right direction and more people are getting access to those tools and knowledge, which then creates opportunities for the next generation to develop skills to tackle complex problems. I'd say another source of hope is the growing efforts to rethink and reshape the educational landscape. There's a recognition of the need to expand what we teach and how we teach it. So, for example, there's a renewed focus on career and workforce development. There's more attention to connecting learning to students' lives outside the classroom or even educational spaces outside the classroom. And I think this really recognizes that children are very diverse in how they learn and that they thrive in these much larger ecosystems where learning is happening across multiple settings, whether at home or at school or in the community. So I think new tools and approaches are helping us learn to make learning more inclusive and more relevant and more engaging, which is promising. But ultimately, I would say for me at least, the greatest source of hope and inspiration always come from the students and the educators themselves.
Yeah.
They're incredibly creative. They crave opportunities to channel that creativity into meaningful projects. And so if we can continue to nurture that and harness their energies, we can cultivate a generation that was not only prepared to address the challenges of today, but solve these problems that we don't even know and can't imagine what they will be yet. So the work that's being done to empower the students and recognize their unique talents is really inspiring, and that's ultimately what gives me hope for the future.
I love that. And I love that sense of their sort of boundless passion and creativity. In some ways, like informing your second reflection, right? For them, there aren't these distinctions between classroom learning and out of school time learning. That this is just, that's being a kid, right? All those different settings. And you and the Museum of Boston have really exemplified that sort of anytime, any place learning that's really engaging and enriching and holistic for kids. Well, Christine, thank you so much for joining us on today's Spotlight On. That's it for today's episode, brought to you by Overdeck Family Foundation. Be the first to know when our next episode hits by subscribing to our YouTube channel or the Foundation's newsletter. Bye.